Hi, and thanks for logging on to the Daily DVAR Halacha. And here's a brand new halacha for you, and it's for Sunday, 25th day of September, 22nd day of Elul. Here we go. Any day now, we're going to switch over to Sukkah's laws because we're going to need to do a lot of them before Sukkah's. But I want to squash in one more about Rosh Hashanah because it too is upon us. So here goes. You know that the Jewish people, by the time they had spent 40 years in the desert, they were unbelievably deeply feeling all of the great gratitude that they owed to God. They had spent 40 years in the desert, and you know what deserts are, and they came out a stronger people. They survived. Amazing things had happened. At the end of those 40 years, they had tremendous victories against other nations that could have been considered powerful, and here they were on the cusp of entering into the land, the promised land, after having vanquished most of the enemies around them and now being ready to vanquish the enemies within Israel. They were at a very heightened state of gratitude towards God for all the good that He had done. And yet, Rav Henoch Leibowitz asked this question, and yet, strangely, God says to the Jewish people in many of the statements through Moshe, as He speaks to them in the final parshas of Devarim, He says to them a lot of times, like, don't become haughty, don't lift up your heart and forget God. And it just seems like the most inopportune time to say this to them. They're at the end of the 40 years. Their gratitude is enormous. They've been fed man, miraculous food every day for 40 years. They've beaten enemies that they shouldn't have been able to beat, and it's so obvious that God is with them, and He tells them, don't become haughty. This is seemingly the time that they need to hear that the least, because, it's so clear at that moment all the good things that God has done for them. They're actually on a high and a closeness to God at that point. So Rav Henoch Leibowitz answers and says, yeah, but human nature doesn't exactly work that way. When you reach a high, even if it's in closeness to God, the evil inclination kind of meets you at whatever level you're at. So if you're at a very high level spiritually, he will then hit you at that level, and he'll start to tell you things that, although you wouldn't expect that they would be important to you at that point, you're close to God. You understand more than ever how thankful you are to God. You understand how you would have been dead without God, and right at that moment is when he could start convincing you that, oh, maybe it's due to your own greatness, or maybe you're just like so amazing that you don't have to ever worry about growing as a human being, because after all, you are close to God, you're amazing. So basically we can end up sitting on our laurels and feel like, I'm amazing. And that's when haughtiness comes in, and you see it all the time. The sort of like the greater they are, the harder they fall. People rise to greatness, and their stories. I mean, there's the famous man that we all refer to as Acher. He was a great, great man, great Talmud Chacham, and late in his life, he just turned and lost it all. And that's because the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, always rises to meet us wherever we are, even as we attain greater levels of holiness. He says, you're good. You're self-made man. The spirituality you've developed is amazing, and that could lead to haughtiness, and it could lead actually to a degradation of your spirituality and your holiness. Okay, that's what Rav Henoch Leibowitz says about why the Jews had to be warned at the end of the 40 years in the desert. Now, what this has to do with us in Rosh Hashanah is this: there are some of you and some people listening, who can look back on their year and say, actually, this was a pretty good year. This was the year that I stopped saying Lashon Hara. I started to learn one halacha day of Lashon Hara. This was the year I started Daf Yomi. This was the year that I decided to give an increased amount to charity. And some of us could look back at our year and say, you know what? I'm actually a lot farther along this year than I was 1 year ago. Some people could say that, and then that bad feeling can creep in of, you know what, I think I can coast this Rosh Hashanah because I'm actually doing a lot better than I was 1 year ago before Rosh Hashanah. And that's where this message comes in. And that's why these speeches of Moshe are so pertinent, these parshas at this time of the year. As Rosh Hashanah approaches, don't sit on your laurels. You're never close enough to God. You're never high enough. God always expects more out of us. I mean, bottom line, take a hard look at yourself and you'll know you're not holy through and through. There's a lot of work to be done. That's what your Yetzer Tov, your good inclination, should be saying to you. And you should never be stuck sitting on your laurels saying, well, I'm amazing. I'm actually quite impressed with myself. And that's why these speeches of Moshe and these parshas right now are perfect for us to hear. So bottom line, as Rosh Hashanah approaches, don't ever get complacent and say, I'm there. I've done all I can, and God's probably pretty pleased with me. I could just relax this Rosh Hashanah. No way. That's the Yetzer Hara. If you ever have such a feeling inside your heart, it's the evil inclination working his bad magic on you. And please realize that we are like on a backwards escalator, always expected to keep stepping and stepping and stepping, or God forbid you will quickly move backwards. One final example of that is that on Yom Kippur afternoon, we end up reading a Torah reading at the Mincha, which is all about not committing immorality. And some people wonder, like, what? On the afternoon of Yom Kippur, I'm reading all this stuff about don't become immoral. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to even think about that topic on a time like Yom Kippur. What are we doing? And it's this thought right here. Because on Yom Kippur, when you feel like I'm like an angel today, I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I'm just praying all day, and you could start to feel like you're amazing, and God says, well, bottom line is you're still a human being. You could fall into immorality, and people are capable of the worst of stuff. So even on Yom Kippur, we read something like that to hammer home this point. You're always human, and you could always slip backwards if you got haughty, and always be looking forward. Hope that all made sense. Thanks for logging on. Log on again tomorrow for more. Bye-bye.